Hey everybody, this is Gary with Earth and Time, and today I'm going to take you to one of my favorite towns or cities within Nevada. It's not Las Vegas, it's not Reno, although I like those as well. It's actually Boulder City, Nevada, the actual first master plan community in the United States and the home to what is now known as Hoover Dam, which used to be called Boulder Dam. So come join me today. Let's learn about the history of this amazing town and the geology around the area here, and check out some old historic buildings, take a look at some fantastic views, and even check out a free museum I'll tell you all about you all can visit as well. So with that being said, let's get to it. This was opened in 1933 and expanded between 1934 and 35. Now remember, the dedication ceremony took place in 1935, and this hotel really was built to accommodate the folks who are going to be coming here for that dedication ceremony. And it retains a lot of the same and nice ambiance. And because it's the holiday time, they've really decked out the lobby, and I'll show you what that looks like as we come in. Notice it's got a lot of the classic wood panel look to it. Now this is a little different than a lot of other kind of southwestern designs, but they did that on purpose to make it feel more familiar for those coming out here from the Northeast, and they kept the style. This is the lobby. You'll see it's the holiday times, but it's absolutely a stunning lobby with a lot of this wood paneling and ornate features that remind me something off of, like, I don't know, the Titanic or something off of one of those kind of old 1920s, 1930s type of movies. And this keeps that same architectural style alive. And they have some nice photos showing what Las Vegas looked like in 1929. Pretty unreal to see it looking like that. Crazy. And if you ever come here, they do have this Join the Damn Crew and Walk Boulder City. It's actually the Boulder City audio tour, and I did that. And I'll share a couple of the highlights with you all. So hopefully if y'all ever make it here, you can do the whole trail on your own. At the hotel, they have this free museum that talks about the history of Boulder City as well as Hoover Dam, and really talks a lot about the people who built the dam. Now you can come and do a tour where you go through the dam. We'll talk about some of this as well. What's great about this is totally free, and you can just park out in the parking lot, come in and learn about the people and how Hoover Dam was created, or back then Boulder Dam, as well as the founding of Boulder City. And they actually start from the beginning of the story of the Great Depression. So Hoover Dam, or Boulder Dam, was built in the 1930s. Now this was really at the height of when the Great Depression was happening, because on October 29th, 1929, they had the major stock market crash known as Black Tuesday, and there was something like 1 in 4 banks closed down, millions of people lost their livelihoods and had to find new things to do. And with the possibility of a large construction project like Boulder Dam, individuals flocked from all over the United States and even across the world to come here and come to the small city just outside Las Vegas, Nevada, which will become Boulder City, and try to scrape out a living for them and their families. They have some great exhibits about this. The idea of individuals traveling from all over coming here and trying to find work and types of things they would take. And individuals moved their whole families here. So you can see the types of material they bring with them in one of these trunks. And with that, they had to move to a desert. A lot of people were from the Northeast or from the coast or from the Midwest, and coming out to somewhere like a desert and see these rattlesnakes here, they had to deal with all kinds of new problems and risks. They actually had to build a town and a community out in the middle of nowhere in the desert, in what they called the ragtown life. When you went down, they were called Ragtown because they would literally use ragged tents to build homes, and they would just get a couple 2x4s, build some basic flooring, and then that would be their house that they'd live in while they were trying to get a job, or they're first starting to make money working here building Boulder Dam. Now, what's fascinating about this was a project, especially in the 1930s, which you can imagine being on par with something like building the pyramids or building any major construction project throughout history. This was a huge undertaking and something that had to get figured out. Individuals have built dams, but this was something on a whole different scale. And especially at the time, it was happening during the Great Depression. It was also seen as a lightning rod for American ingenuity, for the power of the companies here in the United States, and really for the United States to claim a stake saying, this is who we are, and have some national pride. So one of the fascinating stories to me about this whole project is, what do you do with the water flowing through the Colorado while you're building this dam, because you have to have it bypass this area. And what they did is they did what they called taming the Red Bull, a name given to the Colorado River as it came through because it carried so much sediment, and a lot of that sediment was from beds or geology that had red material or iron oxides in it, and it actually create a red look to the river, and the river would flood seasonally, and so they had to also have a race against the flooding in order to divert the river in order to build the dam. Pretty fascinating, and what a work of ingenuity. So how did they do that? Well, lots of drilling, a whole heck of a lot of dynamite, huge excavators, and a crap ton of concrete. In fact, these tunnels were so big, they said they were 3/4 of a mile long and 56 feet wide in diameter. So you can fit modern day, it says jumbo jetliner inside of one of these things. Wow. And once the river was diverted, so they moved the water through those big tunnels, they were able to start building the footing for the dam. Now, being a geologist, I can tell you these are tricky rocks to work with for a lot of different reasons. And the reason they picked this area is because it was a narrow portion of the canyon, which you can see represented by this drawing showing what a surveyor would have looked like out here looking down into the canyon after they've diverted the water and they were starting to put the footings in. One thing I don't see here is that they talk about the geology they had to deal with, but they had to deal with rocks. And the types of rocks here range from things that were mostly really hard, things that were volcanic or metamorphic, but they also had some other things they had to contend with here. Although this is just an artist's rendering of what it looks like, there's actually a series of faults that run through this area. So as a geoscientist, I don't know if this is somewhere I'd want to put a dam today, but they did such a good job bracing it and building it into this canyon that it's actually withstood a long period of time. Pretty fascinating. Of course, as they cleared way for the dam, they had to pour the concrete to start building it, and they had whole groups of individuals, including muckers, that would have to test the concrete, make sure it was strong, and make sure nothing got into it, specifically a lot of impurities. So this is a good time to dispel the myth that there were hundreds of individuals that are trapped in the concrete within Hoover Dam as it's being built. That's just not true. They had to make sure the concrete was as pure as possible, and they actually had folks who would step with their feet in the concrete as they were settling and pouring it in to make sure there was nothing rough or extra trash or anything that got in there, because they needed to be the concrete to be as pure as possible so it would be as strong as possible. Now, there were many individuals who died during the building of Hoover Dam, but their bodies are not in the concrete of the dam. And here's a nice picture showing all these different squares. And each of those squares, they're pouring concrete in, and they have individuals who are checking the concrete, checking the strength of the concrete, taking core samples of the concrete, making sure it's as strong and reliable as possible, because they were going to have to trap a lot of water behind this feature, and it was going to be absolutely gargantuan, and they would have to carry a lot of weight. So that means it needed to be as strong as you can imagine, from the bottom all the way to the top of where the dam would eventually go. This is fascinating. So as concrete sets, it actually releases heat, and you can actually get a lot of heat produced. So they had to find ways to cool this as they were pouring. And so what they did is they had a grid of cooling pipes go in that would actually help cool and allow as the concrete was setting, release the excess heat. It's pretty cool and something I didn't know about. Here's the story I already told you, that despite the stories, no worker was ever buried alive in the concrete. So there you go. And here's a quote about the faults here specifically. When they filled up the lake, it says the filling of the lake and the tremendous amount of weight from the water caused the crust of the earth to change position. So water's heavy on the earth's crust. We had a tremendous number of earthquakes. You could see the dust fly. That is amazing to think about, and scary as well, because as they're filling the lake behind the dam, as all that water is actually weighing down on the crust, it's actually activating faults in the area. The good news is it was a quick test to find out as they were doing that if the dam would hold through earthquakes, and it turns out it did. So it was quite an impressive feat to build this dam. The dam was christened in 1935. So for roughly 4 to 5 years, individuals were working, thousands of individuals were working here through the worst part of the Great Depression. So talking about a real source of pride and hope for the future for all of those individuals. The other thing from an architectural point of view is you'll notice it has a real Art Deco style, which is very much the 1930s style, and one that I'm always fascinated by. I live in Houston, and I love going to the Art Deco buildings designed by Joseph Finger there and taking a look at how he incorporated that Art Deco style into the architecture. Now I found the rocks on the way out. So here's some rhyolite tuff. So that would be what was making up Black Canyon, some of these volcanic units. And then there's also some Navajo sandstone. So that's from upriver at Glen Canyon. So you can get an idea. So this is a sedimentary rock, a sandstone, and this is an igneous rock. So from a volcano. From the museum inside of the Boulder City Dam here, we're going to work our way around the town. I'll show you some of the sights as we take a tour of kind of this old town part. If you remember inside the museum, they showed that this was a planned community. So let's go take a look at some of those areas. They have statues around, they have some historic markers. Let's go take a look at those and see what else we can learn. Out in front of the hotel, they actually have this plaque talking about the dedication of it. So this was opened in 1933 and expanded between 1934 and 35. Now remember, the dedication ceremony took place in 1935, and this hotel really was built to accommodate the folks who are going to be coming here for that dedication ceremony. From across the street of the hotel, I'm really in what would be kind of the old town center. The main hub of the town really has moved slightly to the west of here, but what I want to show is what this kind of old hub of the city looked like. And what I'll do is I'll show you from here where that famous Boulder Theater was at. So this is where people like Roy Rogers performed, and if you remember from the museum, they talked about Shirley Temple performing here in the 1930s and 40s, where they do live shows and mix it with movies or film. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to get in there today, but it is a property has been placed on the National Registry of Historic Places. From the theater, I'm going to work my way north in town and see what other sites are along the way. There are a series of those audio tour sites that we can go up to, and we'll take a look at some of those and talk a little bit more about the history of Boulder City. But first, one thing I love is they have just rocks placed around, and this rock is actually really interesting in the square because this is actually a breccia, and so you'll see it looks like it's all ground up and beaten up. And so this came from along a fault zone, which is pretty interesting. What fault and where, I don't know, but you can see all these little chunks, and we call this a breccia. That's your Earth and Time quick geologic lesson as we walk through Boulder City. So I worked my way up to one of the stops here, and it's one of these audio stops, and I'm actually along Colorado Street, and you'll look at the picture there. So these homes on the street were built in 1931 to 1932, and what they did is they built these rows of homes across here, and these are actually the original homes that have obviously been updated over the last almost 100 years. But all these were original homes for the workers working on Hoover Dam. And at its height, Here, they had over 6,000 people living in the town, making it the third largest city in Nevada at that time, probably followed by Virginia City as probably number one, and then maybe Carson City as number two. I had no idea that Boulder City was really the first of these master plan communities and designed communities for, in this case, it was for workers, but really this concept took off for folks living all over the US eventually. And of course, this was happening in the 1930s during the height of the Great Depression. So coming up with an idea like this and having a community was probably a real boon to morale and really helped the workers and the community bond and come together. I've worked my way up to Nevada Way and Mountain View, and check out this view. Off in the distance, you can see Lake Mead. Now, Lake Mead is a direct result of Hoover Dam or Boulder Dam, and it gives you an idea about the sheer size of it. Now, I'm not exactly sure how far it is all the way across to the far side of the lake. I'm going to guess tens of miles. One thing in the Basin Range, which is the geographic province and the geologic province we're in, is distance gets tricky. Like those mountains are way off in the distance, easily could be 50, 60 miles away, but you can't really tell exactly how far things are here because of the multiple mountains. So this lake behind me here is absolutely huge, over 100 miles long and tens of miles across, and all a result of the building of Hoover Dam. From this vantage point, I can talk a little bit about the geology as well. So the rocks that you see off in the distance that are kind of that reddish color or kind of that greenish gray color, these are all volcanic rocks that were from a series of eruptions during the Miocene. Think, between 10 and 20 million years ago, there were these large volcanoes exploding everywhere, something like Yellowstone. There's a whole series of these exploding through time, and these are all ash deposits from those volcanoes, and this is the material that they actually had to build the dam into down in Black Canyon. The dam was built, the Colorado River started filling up the valleys and the canyons where it used to flow through and created what we have today as Lake Mead. I've worked my way down to a kiosk I saw, and we were standing just above this spot, but this is where I'm at now, and we can see off to Lake Mead out that way, and it gives you an idea of how far you can see and how large this lake is. So if I come back to the images here, in the middle is Hoover Dam, and Hoover Dam sits right here on the map, and you get an idea about how large this lake is. So it extends, it comes through this area, and then it comes all the way out to Virgin Basin, Overton Arm, Temple Basin, over 110 miles long. Pretty phenomenal how large this lake is. And I will say this is a spectacular view, and I imagine as the individuals working on Hoover Dam, they would enjoy this view as well. Of course, they didn't have the water there because the dam wasn't built yet. There would have been big valleys. In fact, they probably couldn't even see the river from here because the river would have been thousands of feet down the canyon that this lake filled up. But they would have had spectacular views from up here, from this master plan community that is Boulder City. And because you all know I'm also a geologist, not just a historian, I have to come over here and take a look at these amazing rocks. So these are absolutely shattered, and this is some kind of potentially diorite or granite. It's hard to tell because it's been so weathered and beaten up, but it's some kind of volcanic rock. And what's really cool about it is you can see all these fracture planes, including, if I get really close, this is a little fault surface. Uh-oh, knocking down the rocks. There's a little fault surface here, so there's been movement on this, which is exactly why this rock looks like it's been beaten up and shattered. So if you remember at the museum, they talked about when they started filling up the lake, they had a series of earthquakes, and some were high enough magnitudes that they actually saw plumes of dust coming off of the earth and off of the ground. Now, not this one probably didn't activate during that time, but this tells me there are faults in the area. So coming full circle with that story, that indeed, as you start a basin like this and you start adding a whole bunch of water, water is heavy. Anybody who's ever picked up a 5-gallon jug or bottle of water realizes how heavy water is. That is millions of times that out there, and all that weight actually settles and presses down on the earth. And also that water will also help lubricate the fault zones, which means they're more prone for movement. So as this started initially filling up, these faults that probably haven't activated in millions of years or hundreds of thousands of years started feeling that pressure, had some water added in there, so created some lubrication and started moving. Hence they had a series of earthquakes. Now, I don't think they've had any modern earthquakes, but if people know more than I do about that, please comment down below and share with us. From the Lake Mead view that you can see still kind of behind me, I'm going to work my way back down into the city. In fact, as I walk back down into the Boulder City Historic District, I'm at the corner of Nevada Way and Denver Street. And these are some of those brick homes in this area that would have been used by the office managers. And Crow, who is the main superintendent over the project and considered one of the best dam builders probably ever, lived in this area as well in one of these homes. I'm not exactly sure which one would have been his. Here's another one of the brick homes, and we're going to head our way down towards the park. The next stop I wanted to show you all is one of the Hoover Dam turbines, which is pretty impressive to see. Here I am for scale in front of that turbine. You get an idea. It's 14 feet across or so, and it is truly massive. This turbine ran until 1982, so from the 40s until the 80s, and was used to help generate the power. So they said Hoover Dam produces enough power for about 1.3 million households. That's pretty impressive. Unfortunately, on this trip, I'm not going to get a chance to actually do the tour at Hoover Dam. That'll have to be another adventure, another time when I'm here. But I want to make sure you guys see one of these turbines, because it's fascinating to me that what I learned is that actually power was the very last reason for building the dam. The first reason really was to help control the seasonal flooding that would occur along the Colorado, which would affect the farms down in the Salton Sea, Imperial Valley area, and also to help add water into this area as well, right? So we created the big lake, then they can siphon off water, they can control that from flooding, they also can control it for irrigation. I didn't realize that was the main purpose, so I learned something new today along the way. I figured there was part of that was part of the story, but then I really thought, well, it must be for the power because they get so much out of it. And in the 1930s, they're really trying to figure out how do you create enough power for all these communities that are starting to build up everywhere from Phoenix to LA to, of course, the Las Vegas area. So now I'm standing in the middle of basically the city park, or Wilbur Square, and this became an integral part of life here in Boulder City. It was said they brought in thousands of trees to plant around the city to try to create some kind of green oasis, which was the original plan, but because of speed in the early 1930s, they actually just let it be basically a desert landscape, but they found that it became too harsh, the dust was too bad, living conditions were not great, so I hired Wilbur to come build these public spaces, including this public park, and planting thousands of trees around the city to help with dust, to help create more of a garden environment here in the desert. So back in the 1930s, again, this was a very novel idea to do something like this. Now, one thing that's interesting here is there are no casinos in Boulder City, so gaming is not allowed within the city, and this is the only city in Nevada where it isn't allowed. A little extra trivia for you. One other stop I want to make is to come take a look at what's now the City Hall, but this was actually the original school for the community of Boulder City. When all the early workers came here with their families, as we learned in the museum, there were no formal schools. People would teach out of houses. because there are kids there. They wanted to keep educating them. And eventually the Bureau of Reclamation, who really controlled the city and what was happening with the dam, ended up building a school here. And this was that first school. And they have this great statue as a remembrance of the fact that this was once a school back in the 1930s. One thing I'd like to say about this community: one, the people are amazing. I met so many fantastic people here, and the scenery is amazing. I mean, look at these fall colors right now, the beautiful green grass, and it's December. So from this vantage point, I want to say thank you all for joining me today to learn about Boulder City, learn about the history, check out some of the local geology within the town, and get an idea about this desert paradise, this really unique place. Really the first master plan community in the United States. Really neat to come visit. I'm excited I got to share this with you all. I do look forward to another venture where I can actually go down into Hoover Dam and share that with you, but that will be another time. So with that being said, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, leave comments down below if you've been here, if you enjoyed this area, maybe something else in this region I should check out next time I'm here. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. I love taking you all with me to learn. So with that being said, take care everybody. See you on the next adventure.